The story of the NHL playoffs has been the Edmonton Oilers' depth. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, I'm going to tell you what changed from the regular season.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday morning edition of Locked On Oilers ahead of Vegas and Edmonton Game 5. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. This is my second NHL playoff run as host of Locked On Oilers. This is my third NHL season with the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been doing hockey content for more than 10 years at this point, and I'm really glad you're here for today's show, and I can't wait to share. On today's show, we are going to walk through a few different threads to explain how the Oilers are making this happen and what has materially changed. So we're going to start things out addressing one of the core concepts of our regular season, the idea that the Oilers were a talented team on paper, but failed to capitalize on their talent. They didn't get good shooting luck. They had some guys regress. Our second segment, we're going to explain why in the playoffs their lineup has taken shape a little bit better. Obviously, Evander Kane returning to the lineup from injury, Trent Frederic coming out of a serious lower body injury and actually playing hockey helps a ton. And then we're going to tie a bow on today's show, explaining what this means for the Oilers in the macro, the big picture, and whether it's sustainable or not. So to start things out, if you'll recall, we entered the 2024-2025 NHL season with the Edmonton Oilers as the betting favorites to take home the Stanley Cup. They were somewhere between 7-1 and 9-1, depending where you looked. And the Oilers, to their credit, coming off of last year's Stanley Cup final where they ran out of gas, they felt that they couldn't score enough consistently, especially at 5-on-5. And it made them prioritize getting some extra scoring. And they went above and beyond. Some could make an argument that they overdid trying to create more 5-on-5 offense at the expense of maybe the defense or maybe some of the less translatable metrics, stuff like foot speed and energy. But they came away from the first day of free agency with Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson. They had to trade Ryan McLeod to make the money work. And they eventually lost Dylan Holloway to an offer sheet to the St. Louis Blues. So if you want to go in the aggregate and say they lost Warren Foegele, they lost Dylan Holloway, and they lost Ryan McLeod, and they slid in Jeff Skinner, Victor Arvidsson, and then Vasily Podkolzin eventually comes in as the last forward to kind of fill things out. On paper, we were assuming the Oilers would play Ryan Nugent-Hopkins with McDavid and Hyman. Arvidsson and Skinner would flank Draisaitl. Chris Knoblauch would get to keep the third line he liked so much last year together, and Janmark, Henrique, and Connor Brown. And then the fourth line would be some permutation of Derek Ryan, Corey Perry, and Vasily Podkolzin. And for a majority of the regular season, that wasn't the case. We saw players like Kasperi Kapanen and Vasily Podkolzin find homes in the top six with Leon Draisaitl for extended periods of time. And some of that was by virtue of injuries. Guys like Hyman missed time, guys like McDavid missed time. So there was definitely an element of a mash unit early on in the season. And as the season went along, it became very clear that Jeff Skinner, who has multiple 30-goal seasons on his resume, won the Calder Trophy all those years ago as a rookie, he just wasn't a guy. Chris Knoblauch, there was something about Jeff Skinner's game that wasn't doing it for him. And if you go back and look through the episode log, there are quite a few episodes of Locked On Oilers from the regular season and the everydayers recall. I was pretty adamant that the underlying numbers would come around because Jeff Skinner was playing pretty good hockey. That in his minutes, the Oilers were out-chancing, out-high-danger chancing, out-expected goalsing their opposition, and they just weren't getting the bounces. They had a really rough run of luck. I know that Jeff Skinner, when he played with McDavid at the start of the season, they had a really rough run of luck as far as shooting luck and goaltending luck. So after that first month, it was effectively impossible for Skinner to earn his way back into the top six. And as the season went along, what was supposed to be a strength of the team, the forward depth, it didn't really materialize. And you think about all of the players who had setbacks this year as far as their production. So the Oilers' 4 most common line combinations in the regular season. The first one, Nugent-Hopkins, McDavid, Hyman. Podkolzin, Draisaitl, Arvidsson. Janmark, Henrique, Connor Brown. And then the fourth line, some combination of Derek Ryan and Corey Perry, and whichever wing happened to be playing there, whether it was Noah Phillip, whether it was Max Jones. They have went through quite a few different guys to fill out that spot. And when you think about it, on paper, that lineup is still pretty good. And it still has enough offense based on track record that you should feel okay. Jeff Skinner has 30-goal seasons. Arvidsson has been a 50 to 70 point guy. McDavid is always good for at least 100, even though this year a little harder than usual. Draisaitl, good for 100 points. And Nuge, you would expect somewhere between 50 and 70. Hyman, you probably expect somewhere between 60 and 70. More goals, obviously. And a funny thing happened. The Oilers' 5-on-5 offense didn't really manifest in the way that we thought it would. It didn't really come together in a way that it was supposed to, the way the roster was constructed. And it's always interesting to try and psychoanalyze general managers and, by virtue of analyzing their moves, try and get an understanding of what they're thinking. And Jeff Jackson, who was the GM on July 1st, is very obviously not the GM now. He wasn't by the end of August when they hired Stan Bowman to be the GM. And he felt very clearly they needed more 5-on-5 offense. And guys like Skinner and guys like Arvidsson had significant track records of regular season success. They were coming off of depressed value seasons where Skinner got bought out and Arvidsson was coming off of a major back injury and didn't have a huge sample size. So the Oilers offered those guys the opportunity to play alongside McDavid and Draisaitl and ring chase. And it did not manifest. And one of the fascinating things year over year about the Oilers this year versus last year is they were a really, really average 5-on-5 team this year. They were 14th in the NHL in goal share. They scored 168 goals. They conceded 171 goals. So they had a -3 even strength goal differential for the season. And that's not inherently disqualifying when you have good special teams the way the Oilers do, but it's crazy to think about how much better the Oilers have played in the regular season versus the playoffs. And for context, last year at 5-on-5, the Oilers outscored their opponents 193 to 153. So a +40 goal differential is nothing to sneeze at. And last year in all situations, the Oilers outscored their opponents by 56 goals. This year, they only outscored opponents by 24. So I'm not great at math, but 56 minus 24, you bring down the 2, you bring down the 3. So 32 fewer goals in the goal differential than last year, which supports the idea that the Oilers underperformed relative to their expectations, because on paper, you were adding multiple former 20 goal scorers, and you had a reasonable expectation that everybody else would be within their career averages. Which brings us to the Evander Kane conundrum. The Oilers knew he probably wasn't going to start the season on time. The Oilers know that when Evander Kane is healthy, he is an effective hockey player. They saw how injured he was at the end of last year's playoffs. He tried to rehab as opposed to getting surgery through the summer, ultimately opted for the surgery in the fall, misses the entire regular season, and having Evander Kane as an option in building out this lineup has elongated the Oilers lineup, and it's given them what we're going to talk about next. And I'm going to tell you why Evander Kane is the key to making the rest of this engine work and why it's so important the Oilers don't get away from what's working. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily nutritional value. Plus, they're packed with that crucial fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. Personally, I'm a big fan of the no-shell variety. It is the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, whether I'm here at my desk working on the show, doing research or production, or I'm just trying to squeeze in a few more grams of protein to hit my macros for the day. They're a great go-to. Or If you love cracking open a shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are an old school classic. Did you know that wonderful pistachios are a complete protein that provide all 9 essential amino acids? So you should get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com today to learn more. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers ahead of Game 5 between the Oilers and the Golden Knights. And frankly, friends, I have had to eat quite a bit of crow through the course of this playoff series. And I do want to emphasize, it's very important I say this series is not over. Playoff hockey is a mysterious and cruel mistress. And the minute you think you got it figured out, it tells you don't know nothing. So with that in mind, a lot of this conversation is going to be analytical. It's going to be looking at what we have access to as far as data. And one of the key points to understanding a lot of this information is that underlying numbers are not necessarily predictive. They are descriptive. They tell you what has already happened. In conjunction with each other, you can paint a more coherent and well-rounded picture. And based on that, you can start to get an idea as to whether or not the results you are watching are what we call sticky, transferable, or repeatable. They are conducive to winning because obviously, if you watch a team get consistently outchanced, consistently outshot, consistently out high danger chance, and your goalie is playing his heart out every single night, eventually that breaks down. It might not for one game. It might not for one series. Hell, every 10 to 15 years, you get a goalie who goes crazy for an entire playoff run. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. It is not a methodology that is going to lead to success in the long term. And one of the real paradoxes of Stanley Cup playoff hockey is that the playoffs itself are very long. We're talking about the middle of April, all of May, and the majority of June to get to the Stanley Cup final. So we're talking about a pretty big sample of games. Somewhere between 20 and 30 games is where most Stanley Cup finals are going to fall by the end. You're going to play at most 28, and then you're going to, usually if you win the Stanley Cup, you play somewhere in the ballpark of 24. The loser usually plays a few more games. They're usually a little bit more worn down than that. But the Oilers have found a lineup formulation that has enabled them to play truly remarkable hockey at 5-on-5. And it's really important to emphasize that the Oilers' penalty kill has been actively bad. Actively bad. So far in the playoffs, the Oilers have conceded a power play goal on 11 of the 32 penalty kill opportunities they've had. They are killing off 65% of penalties. That is an egregiously poor penalty kill record. You think about that in contrast to last year, where they had the best penalty kill in the entire playoffs. They had one of the best power plays in the entire playoffs, and they were average at 5-on-5. They had a +1 5-on-5 goal differential by the end of Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final last year. This year, they have the best playoff goal differential of any team in the postseason, which should go to show you how many different ways there are to win in the playoffs. And one of the things that's utterly fascinating to me is the conversations we have as playoffs develop, when they're over, after we crown a Stanley Cup champion, and we try and analyze what worked for them. And depending on the year, the takeaways are different. When Vegas won, it was you need big defensemen who are capable of withstanding forechecks and playing physical hockey. When Tampa Bay won, it was you need 9 forwards through. You need to be able to roll 4 lines relatively evenly. When Florida won last year, you need to have a bit of some snarl to you. You need to work a cycle. You need to be able to play high to low. You need to be able to win the game at 5-on-5. And to their credit, after inserting Evander Kane into this lineup, the Oilers have found a way to combine quite a few of those environmental factors that worked for previous teams. Now, their defense is not going to be confused with the Golden Knights team that won the Cup a couple years ago. There's no Shea Theodore. There's no Pietrangelo. There's no Nick Hague. There is no big, brawling, towering defenseman. Nurse is that physically, but he doesn't play that way, so it doesn't particularly matter. And what's worked for the Oilers here, that is truly remarkable, is they've found 4 forward combinations they literally could not have run at the start of the season. Frankly, for a majority of the season, they got to play Trent Frederic for 7 minutes before the playoffs started. They didn't play Evander Kane a single minute of the regular season. You insert Evander Kane, you get another top 6 forward in the mix, so everybody can slide down a spot. Then you make the tactical decision after game 2 against LA that we need to just find what our equilibrium is. And when in doubt, like SpongeBob, you break out old reliable, you go to Connor, you go to Leon, and whoever's going to be their wing, whether it's Corey Perry, whether it's Zach Hyman, whether it's Evander Kane. And we've seen, to a lesser extent, we've seen Hyman and Kane moonlight up there for a few shifts here and there, depending on the game situation. But in putting Corey Perry with Leon and Connor and Leon, all they do is cause chaos. Those high offensive zone passes wide bring the defenders further away from their net. That's where Perry can slip in. We talked about that walk it out play where Perry will have his back to the goalie. He'll be looking outwards and he'll receive the pass on his forehand and he can either spin it to come back around onto his strong side and power it around, which he did for a couple goals in the LA series and for one of the goals last Saturday in game 3, or he can run the backhand and try and catch the goalie off guard and at the very least draw attention, draw heat. Then your second line. When you're running Kane, Nugent-Hopkins, and Hyman, Kane and Hyman are great on the forecheck. They both have high-end finishing talent. They're above 10% shooters for their careers. You get those guys the puck in dangerous areas in and around the net front, they're going to be able to convert their chances. They are not afraid of contact. They are willing to go to the net. You play a more high to low, structured, slow the game down style with those guys out there. And then, as reinforcements, you get to break out that Trent Frederic, Adam Henrique, and Connor Brown line. Frederic and Brown provide a little bit of speed in transition, not game-breaking, but enough speed that they're able to counterattack. They definitely get a lion's share of the difficult zone starts. They do get a lot of defensive zone starts against the other team's best players, and Brown and Frederic on the wings enable the Oilers to kind of withstand some of that pressure and unleash soccer-style counterattacks where they're able to create off of the rush. And then, because you've got multiple lines that play in different styles, it doesn't really matter a whole lot what your fourth line does. And then the Oilers stumble into a fourth line that works. After all year where the fourth line was an afterthought, where it was whoever were the last 3 forwards on a given night, and you talk about how you've gotten great production out of Janmark. You've gotten absolutely great production out of Mattias Janmark, out of Vasily Podkolzin and Victor Arvidsson. I know Kapanen came in for Arvidsson in game 4, but by and large, those have been the Oilers' most common forward combinations. So at 5-on-5 through the playoffs so far, the Oilers are outscoring their opponents 19-8. That's a plus 11. Again, last year, game 7, Stanley Cup final, +1 goal differential at 5-on-5. That is a night and day difference. And you think about how they're doing this. They have almost 68, 67% of the high danger chances in the whole playoffs. When you average it out and you add up the 74, 60, 57, and 50, you get 61% of the high danger chances. That tells you to some degree that this offense is going to stick. That tells you, because you have some of your guys in your lineup that are high quality players that are going to create off the rush, that are going to be able to outperform some of the environmental stuff. Your bottom 6 guys, they're playing the game the right way. They're getting pucks in deep. They're slowing it down. The Oilers aren't playing a lot of defense at 5-on-5, and they've been able to overcome league worst goaltending in the postseason. They have been able to overcome, up until game 4 was the worst penalty kill in the playoffs, including teams that have been eliminated, like the Kings and Senators. So you play this dominant 70 to 75% of the game, which is what 5-on-5 is, depending on the given game. NHL, their stats say between 70 and 75% of the goals in an NHL game are scored during regulation. So that's roughly the framework we operate within. You get that much of the offense, and you still have room for improvement in your goaltending and your special teams. This is a dangerous recipe and something that really might have legs. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, I'm going to tell you what it means in the aggregate and why I think this is going to work. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers ahead of Oilers Knights Game 5. And we will have an episode for you soon as the game is done tonight. I will do my best to get that out as fast as humanly possible. Production can at times be slow. Sometimes YouTube doesn't want to buffer. Sometimes our Tegna one doesn't want to buffer. Sometimes even our audio uploads slow sometimes. So I'm going to do my best to get that out for you as soon as possible. But in the aggregate, being the best team in the playoffs at 5-on-5 means a few things. Number one, it means you're in control of the game for large swaths. It means you are playing hockey at a high level for a majority of the game. And by sheer probability, the more favorable game situations you put yourself in, the more likely you are to get good outcomes. And remember what we were saying before about predictive versus descriptive? Just because you're playing good hockey doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get rewarded. We all know sometimes a goalie will stand on their head. Sometimes a defenseman's going to get a stick in the lane. Sometimes a goalie is going to get a body part in the way accidentally. Sometimes a puck's going to hit the post and there's nothing you can do. Sometimes it is not your night. But when things are going well for you, for good stretches of the game, and you still have room for improvement, and for the most part, what you're doing looks pretty sustainable, that's a really dangerous combination of environmental factors. We talked a couple years ago when Vegas won the Stanley Cup, they did it with a 66-33 5-on-5 goal differential. 67% of the scoring chances, 67% of the goals, at 5-on-5 over the course of a playoff run. Remarkable. One of the best playoff runs of all time, frankly. And I don't think they get enough credit for being that good of a team, for being able to roll all four lines and all three pairs and getting strong results. And I think the Oilers, frankly, aren't getting enough credit for what they've put together here and how they have effectively turned it on. You know, you go back and you listen to the last week of the regular season of this show where I was telling the everydayers, the Oilers are going to have to turn it on like they haven't played all season. And to their credit, they have played four of their best games, arguably their four best games all year in the playoffs, between the overtime game against the Kings, then Game 5, and then I would argue Game 4 against Vegas was all the more impressive. And I would tell you that it feels like the Oilers still have more juice to squeeze out of the fruit. And that's a good place to be. And when you talk about it in terms of why I think this is sustainable, number one, they have reasonable chances. They have reasonable chance shares and reasonable shot on goal shares. They're positive in all of their shot shares. Every single line combination, their four most common ones in the playoffs, have greater than 50% of the shots on goal in their ice time. Two of their forward combinations have less than 50% of the scoring chances, but you got to remember, scoring chances, shots on goal are not the same thing. Scoring chances include block shots. They include shots that miss the net entirely, and that is different. That tells you, though, although they are in their own zone a lot, because they're still out shooting the opponents as opposed to out chancing, they're getting the puck on the net more frequently. And that's why the Oilers are the only team in the Stanley Cup playoffs that have a greater than 50% goal share from all four of their lines, and only team to have all four of their lines be at least 50% of the high danger chances. That is a remarkable feat, because that's telling you they are scoring a lot. They are creating dangerous offense. And those two together tell you there is room, tells you that this is workable. And look, I should note the Oilers do have some insane shooting percentages at 5-on-5 on some of these lines. McDavid, Draisaitl, Perry are at 18%. Henrique, Brown, and Frederic are at 12.5%. And Arvidsson, Janmark, and Podkolzin are at 21%. I don't think the shooting percentages are going to stick. But again, when you have, a +8 goal differential at 5-on-5, you can go a little while with your shooting cooling off, because you still have game control. And that's really the key for me here. The Oilers are the team that is on the front foot. The Oilers are the team that are putting the other team in disadvantageous positions for 70 to 75% of the game. You do that 7 times. Most of the time, you're going to win 4 out of 7. Yes. Sometimes you're going to lose heartbreakers. Sometimes you're going to lose the game. You outshoot the opponent 32 to 17. Sometimes your goalie's just not going to have it, or he's not going to make the save at the most important point of the game. It happens. It's part of hockey. But I fundamentally believe this Oilers team has the emotional maturity and has the experience to be able to handle this, to be able to continue pushing, to continue letting this hunger that is very clear to me drive them. And I don't know if the emotions are sustainable indefinitely. They might hit an emotional wall at some point if they face some serious adversity down the road, but this is a team that is being led by the best player in the world, coming off of a playoff run where he scored 43 points in 25 games. He won the Conn Smythe as the losing team. I would not want to be the guy that disappoints the next guy from getting his. And I don't think it's out of fear. I think it is out of admiration, and I think it is out of respect. And I have not seen the Oilers play as well as they did in Game 4, probably all season. That was a full-throated butt kicking from start to beginning. Now, pivoting for the last 3 minutes here before we wrap up into tonight's game. Number one, this is your kitchen sink game if you're the Vegas Golden Knights. You will burn every last bit of energy. Expect Eichel to play 23, 24 minutes. If Pietrangelo can go, which is doubtful, he was definitely limping around. He definitely didn't look good in Game 4. He's going to try to go. You are going to see the Golden Knights do whatever they can to try and get anything going. Expect after the whistle shenanigans, because Vegas has a bunch of those big guys who aren't afraid and are going to be willing to mix it up to try and give themselves an emotional spark because they need one. The desperate team always comes out with energy. It'll be incumbent upon the Oilers to withstand that initial push, to keep themselves close enough that they have a chance to mount an energy comeback. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be losing, but you know when a team comes out with a little bit of extra juice, they're controlling the game, they're really pushing hard to get that first goal to set the tone. You know what is a funny way of swinging that game? When the team that's being outshot 11-4 scores the goal and makes it 1-0, and then the other team needs to score 2 goals straight to win, and they already had a majority of the shots on goal and they're not scoring enough. So with all of that said, you should be savoring this moment. You think about what happened when these two teams met the last time. You think about the Pietrangelo-Draisaitl. You think about how much better Vegas looked. This Oilers team, to their credit, has found the depth within. And that sounds very metaphorical. That's a good idea for the name of like a young adult fiction novel, The Depth Within. But this group has shown an incredible amount of resilience and has shown the ability to answer the bell when the chips were down in a way I didn't think was possible 4 weeks ago when the Stanley Cup playoffs began. That will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Leave me a comment. I've been doing a better job about managing the comment section, giving feedback. And by all means, if there's a topic you want me to hit, if you think I'm a dumbass, if you think there's other things I'm not addressing, by all means, let me know. I like this to be a two-way avenue because I do this show for the audience. Without the audience, there isn't a show. If you could be so kind. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. If you're itching for more, go check out the Locked On NHL feed for Locked On NHL in the mornings, covering the biggest stories going into the next day's games, and NHL Game Night, which goes live after the last game of the night goes final, where they break down the action from that night's games. I will talk to you guys after game number 5 between the Edmonton Oilers and the Vegas Golden Knights. Hopefully, knock on wood, if you can hear that, knock on wood, the Oilers will advance to the Western Conference Finals again. I'll talk to you guys then. And until then, let's go Oilers.